so neat that my husband found you through TikTok and was like, you should talk to him. And I was like, they wouldn't have time for me.
No, I'm happy to do it.
Hi, thank you so much, Pastor Jeff, for being here. I met you through TikTok, and you are somebody after my own heart. You are ruffling feathers. It's hard. It's hard to realize that where you've been is wrong. You've got so much knowledge. So I really love your thing on TikTok of the clobber verses, verses that people use to try to use Christianity as a means of promoting homophobia, transphobia, phobia in general.
Yeah. Clobber verses part 3. Still on Leviticus 18, it's important to understand the historical context for this verse and the purpose of the law in general. The law serves two main purposes: to provide justice and equity for all, and to distinguish the Israelite religion from the religions around it. That's why Jesus said the law can be summed up in these two commands: love God, love your neighbor. So if this verse is not about justice and equity for all, then it has to be the other kind, which we can confirm by looking at the beginning of the chapter where it says, don't be like the Egyptian and Canaanite religions. We also have a pretty strong clue that this verse is in a religious context against idolatry, because the verse directly before it says, don't offer your children to Moloch, who is a Canaanite god. Say what you will about the law, you can't say that it isn't meticulously planned out by category. So either Moloch is way out of place, or this section is about sexual practices in relation to religious idolatrous practices that often did involve children. In the next video, we'll look at what some scholars have to say about that. The verse is used to condemn homosexuality and then the entire LGBTQ community as a sort of an extension of that. Like for years, I was talking with my mom about this morning. I was like, it doesn't feel like it should be wrong to be gay, but I guess that's what the Bible says, so I guess that's what I'll go with. Like that was sort of my attitude for years and years, and it was like really diving into scripture and understanding the historical context and what certain words mean in ancient Greek and in Hebrew, and like where else those words are used is really helpful in understanding like the context of what's going on. What else is happening in the chapter and book and the grander narrative of the Bible around those verses is really important, and something that we don't often, or that Christians don't often look at. We kind of break off these individual verses absent of context and use them as a weapon. Clobber verses part 5. Let's look at what some scholars have to say about Leviticus 18:22. I woke up like this. Okay, so in the ancient world, it was a common practice in many religions, including the Canaanite and Egyptian ones, to initiate boys or young men into temple service by forcing them to engage in sexual acts with the priests. Keesmaat and Walsh are going to say that this is what this verse is specifically referencing. Heiser is going to say that this verse is in response to that practice, but was expanded to a full ban and is fully condemning homosexual activity. But he's also going to point out that the full ban would have also been in response to the belief that human sperm are fully formed little people, and any non-procreative sex would have been tantamount to murder. We now know, thanks to science, that this is not the case. We'll get into the Sodom story in a few videos and how it's not about homosexuality, it's about sexual violence, but Cortman is going to say that Leviticus 18:22 is in response to the Sodom story, but is condemning the specifically violent act and not homosexuality as a whole or a sexual orientation. And it's done so in like a way that's like, they think they're doing something. They think they're doing something helpful. And I always, even before I sort of deconstructed and reconstructed my faith, I was always like, I would say this about evangelism. I'm like you gotta take the materials you have and make a raft out of it, so you can go out to the drowning people and save them or help them like get back to shore. What most evangelism is doing is breaking off chunks of the rock and throwing it at the people who are drowning and saying, swim back to shore or you're gonna go to hell. So like we have to understand the materials we have to work with so that we can make that raft, and I guess in this context stay afloat, because we're not talking about evangelism necessarily, but I guess evangelism to the evangelists, is that a thing?
What would you say to the people that are just really stuck in the, it's not, I'm telling you the truth because I love you, and
Right.
it's the right thing to tell you that God hates that lifestyle and that it's disgusting to him.
I find it really interesting that this is the scripture you're using to try and disprove me. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him. We can come back to the word abomination later. Haughty eyes, like thinking your interpretation is the only correct one. A lying tongue, like not looking at any cultural or scriptural or historical context. Hands that shed innocent blood when you have a theology that literally kills LGBTQ people. A heart that devises wicked plans while you are a troll anonymously leaving hateful comments on people's walls. A lying witness who testifies falsely when you refuse to acknowledge, again, the context that the scriptures are written in and what they're actually trying to say. And one who sows discord in a family, like the families of LGBTQ people who reject them for no reason. Abomination or toeva is a term for idolatry that profanes the image of God in people like you're doing now. I didn't start posting on TikTok to change those people's minds.
Okay, what would you say to that mindset then? The mindset.
Yeah, like I think when you can lovingly point out the inconsistencies in their argument, and sometimes I get super sassy about it because they're being super sassy about it, and I'm not gonna like resort to name calling or anything like that, but I think pointing out how people are being ridiculous in a funny way, like I don't think it's going to change that person's mind. I think they're going to double down on whatever they're saying, but it might illuminate to other people what's happening. And so yeah, so my whole philosophy has been with all this. When I'm on Facebook, I have a 2-comment policy. Like if I see something, I'll comment. The person will respond often, and I will allow myself one more comment, and then I'll be done. Because if I can't express what I need to express in 2 comments, we're going to argue about it for days, and neither of us are going to change our mind, and it's just going to fill both of us with anxiety. And so like that's kind of social media in general. So with TikTok, I'm like, I'm going to come and try and like talk to the people who are almost there, or talk to the people who are starting to ask questions, or talk to the LGBTQ2 plus people who want to have a faith that have been told that they can't, and like really minister to them. When I am engaging with people with that mindset, I'm kind of like well, let's look at it, because I'm like here's my evidence for it, like because I do often engage with them and talk about it. I'm like, here's what I have to say about the historical context of these verses and the way that Hebrew and Greek work, and what they're saying here and what's going on, and the grander narrative of, like, especially Romans is a huge one. People are always pulling out Romans, and I'm like, well, Romans is about addressing idolatry, and specifically like that verse, Romans 1:26 and 27, which is used as a clobber verse to condemn homosexuality. I'm like, it's in the context of idolatry. If you just read the 5 verses prior to that, like, you don't even have to read the whole chapter. If you just read 5 verses prior to that, Paul's talking about things that are done in worship to idols. And like we know from Greek and Roman culture that idol worship, like the Greek and Roman temples practiced like pederasty, and the Greek and Roman emperors practiced sexual humiliation as a form of dominance and conquest. So we're like, yeah, if that's what's happening, like if people are having non-consensual sex involving pederasty and sexual humiliation in worship to idols, let's stop doing that. Let's not have that. That's a bad thing. I fully believe that Romans 1:26 and 27 is right. Like it's like, and like Leviticus 18:22 is right, because it's talking about this context of like idolatry. If you read the verse direct, like Leviticus 18:21, it's talking about Moloch, the demon god who required child sacrifice. And then it's the next verse, like if it was like a blanket, if it was a blanket condemnation on homosexuality, it wouldn't need to also specify in other places not to sleep with your father or your brother, right? Like we wouldn't need those verses. It's like, hey, sleeping with men is wrong. Okay, so we don't need to include not to sleep with your father and your brother because they're men.
That's redundant.
And so, yeah, it's redundant. Like, and like the law is like meticulously planned out. Like it's not the Moloch verse and 1822 don't appear beside each other by coincidence. Like it's like the law is like one of the most, like the first 5 books of the Bible are one of the most meticulously planned out documents in like the history of documents. So like everything is placed in a certain place on purpose. So I'll present my evidence and what I know about these things, and I'm like, tell me why this is wrong, and we'll have a conversation. And very rarely can they do it. They're like, well, it says it. And I'm like, no, it says it in English. It says it in English in more recent translations when we understand the context of what's happening. I think Proverbs 9:17 says, stolen water is sweet and food eaten in secret is delicious. But the context of that verse is this is stuff that stupid people say, right? So like if we don't understand what the context of the verse is, then I'm going to be stealing water and food and eating them in secret because that's what the Bible told me to do. Like stolen water is sweet and food eaten in secret is delicious. Amazing. So like we have to understand the context of what's being said in scripture or it's meaningless.
Yeah. Oh, that is good stuff. So basically, there really is proof, looking to the historical translations and the culture that things were written to, that every single verse condemning homosexuality is condemning rape.
Yeah, essentially. But like, yeah, I'm going through the different verses and sort of explaining like the context of them. So like Leviticus 18:22 is addressing idol worship. Like Leviticus 18 starts by saying like, hey, don't practice religion like the Canaanites and the Egyptians do, which involved a lot of like sexual things in worship. And so they're sort of like condemning this type of sexual idolatry. And it even gets to the point where it says like, yeah, don't give your children to Moloch and don't lie with a man as you lie with a woman. And like there's sort of an oversimplification that happens. So you have like these two ways of people interpreting the scripture, and you have like the conservative hyper literalistic point of view, which is like take the words in English exactly as they are, King James if you can, like like there's these King James primists, and then you have like people like progressive people who are like, well, the original translation of Leviticus 18:22 says don't sleep with young boys, and it doesn't actually say that in the Hebrew. It says that in one of the German translations from the 1500s. But it is the implication of the reason Martin Luther translated it that way is because that is the implication, is that in the ancient world, in idolatry and often in like military contexts, rape was a form of initiation into those things. So if you were giving your child into the priesthood of like a pagan god, they would often have to be like sexually dominated in order to be initiated into service in that temple. Or if someone was joining the military, they would often be sexually dominated by their commanding officer as a method of control, because when people are psychologically tortured and physically tortured, they're more likely to question their own worth and be willing to be sort of molded into whatever you want to make them into without questioning it. So like that's the context of that verse. And then like Romans and Corinthians and all these other verses in the New Testament often use the word arsenokoitai, which is a mashup word of arsen, which is man, and koite, which is bed, which is like a mashup of the two words used in the Greek translation of Leviticus 18:22, because that's sort of what all the New Testament authors were working with. Primarily, they weren't quoting from the Hebrew text; they're quoting from the Greek translation of the Hebrew text. And so Paul's using that to reference to Leviticus 18:22, and like even even conservative theologians are going to say that, they're going to disagree with me on what Leviticus 18:22 is saying, but there's lots of other theologians and scholars that agree with me on what Leviticus 18:22 is saying. That's the thing about scholarship, is people can disagree about it. But like even conservative theologians are going to say like Romans and Corinthians are referencing Leviticus 18:22. We just disagree about what Leviticus 18:22 is talking about. But like, again, if Paul's in Romans is referencing Leviticus 18:22, it doesn't say arsenokoitai in Leviticus 18:22, but it says the not mashed up version of those words. Like it just says the basic translation. So like in Romans 1, like he like I said earlier, like he talks about like it's they traded the glory of the immortal God for the images carved of stone, of things that creep, and of people and of beasts of the like he's saying, he's outlining like this is what happens when we slip into idolatry, is we slip back into this Leviticus 18:22 mindset. And we can't be doing that, because there's actually, I want to say 16 existing verses or existing words in Koine Greek for homosexuality, and Paul doesn't use those. He uses one. He uses malakoi, which is one of the words, but he invents this word arsenokoitai to be a specific reference to Leviticus 18:22, where if he wanted to condemn homosexuality, he could have used any of these other words. Most of them were derogatory, because it was like, while it was popular to be the top, it was very unpopular. Like it was shameful, as shameful in Roman culture to be the bottom. So these, like, if Paul wanted to be talking about condemnation of homosexuality, he could have used any number of these already negative terms for homosexuality, and he didn't. He invented his own, and he used malakoi, which means like soft one or penetrated one, which is like often in other ancient Greek writings referencing sort of that relationship of like, again, like military service and temple service. So
I've heard that a lot of people think that Paul was just super homophobic, but it was really more that people who translated the Bible into different languages that put their homophobia.
Yeah, like I think Paul probably, did Paul think homosexuality was cool? I think he was homophobic. I don't think he thought it was morally wrong, and I don't think like he wasn't putting a moral imperative on not doing it. It was more that like they are in a sexist, homophobic culture, much less so than now, to a certain, like more so sexism, less so homophobia. I don't know that he would have been like, I think the modern idea of homosexuality Paul would have no problem with. Like I think people being in a romantic relationship, consensual relationships, I think he would have had no issue with that. What we have to understand is like, so Rob Bell, I don't know if you know who that is. He's a pastor from America who ended up losing his job as the senior pastor of the church he founded because he wrote a book called Love Wins, which is more of a universalist spin on heaven and hell. Not even a full universalist spin. It just questions whether or not there's a hell, and whether it's forever. But he's super learned, like he's very well educated, and he talks about he was applying this to the verse. Look, there's tons of terrible verses in the Bible, but to understand the context of where it's coming from, it's always a step in the right direction. Like things were worse before the terrible verses were written, essentially. So like Rob Bell's addressing the verse that says, if you invade a new land and you take one of the slaves from that land as a wife for yourself, you can't, and she displeases you, you can't sell her. You have to release her and make her a free woman and give her money to survive and stuff like that. And we look at that and we're like, oh my God, that's terrible. Like they're taking slaves, they're forcing them into marriage. And yeah, that's terrible stuff and totally wrong. It was a step in the right direction, because before that verse was written, there was no law governing it, so people would just take slaves and sexually abuse them, and if they displeased them, they would kill them or cast them out, and they would be destitute and alone for the rest of their lives. And it was terrible. So this verse was a step in the right direction towards feminism, even though it's a terrible, like, no, don't do that. Like, how about don't take slaves, right? So we kind of have to understand the evolution of morality throughout the Bible. So I think, like, I don't love everywhere where Paul lands, but I think everything Paul says is a step in the right direction. I don't think he was like against women in ministry. There's lots of evidence to suggest that, like, Paul had lots of women partners in his ministry who were leaders in the church. And I don't think he was against homosexuality. I think he was against rape and sexual humiliation. Like, I think those are the things he was against. And he saw a direct correlation between those things and idolatry, which the Old Testament seems to have seen as well.
So I was thinking, let's switch gears a little bit. So back in the before times, you and your spouse were in a cis straight presenting marriage.
Yeah.
Were you also attending a church that was against LGBTQ people?
Yeah, so like our denomination that we came out of is kind of struggling with it. My spouse is gender fluid, so some days feels more feminine, some days feels more masculine, some days feels neither. We, like, our denomination's kind of wrestling with it. There's a lot of people in the denomination who are affirming and who want to like have full LGBTQ2PA plus inclusion in the church, in both leadership and in worship, want to be performing same gender, same sex weddings. And we just can't because of the like bylaws of the denomination. And there's an equal amount of people, like it's literally like split 50-50 kind of right now, of people wanting to become more progressive and people wanting to regress more and become more conservative.
Which denomination is that?
It's the Canadian Baptist Ontario Quebec. So there's lots of like amazing people. Some of the biggest advocates for LGBTQ inclusion in the church I've ever seen are in that denomination. There is a sort of split denomination that's still part of that denomination that also has the ability to ordain people. And so pastors who do want to perform LGBTQ weddings will often transfer their ordination to this like side denomination called the Gathering of Baptists. But so like there's good work happening there. I just can't wait for it to get there. We saw a need right away. We had, I think, 6 people last June contact us. It was former parishioners and former kids from my youth group who are now adults, and they're like, I'm gay or I'm queer and I don't feel like there's a home in the church. I need to know what your stance on homosexuality is. My spouse and I had been wrestling with that for years, had a while back like came around to where we are now on the issues, but hadn't really been outspoken because the denomination wasn't yet outspoken. And as queer people ourselves, I'm queer as well. We didn't feel it was safe if we came out as supporting, like as officially supporting. We would make comments, and if people asked us about it, we'd be honest about it, but we weren't like advocating for it. And because it was our livelihood and our church family and our support system, and we just knew like if we came out, we're going to lose a lot of that. And so we didn't. And then last June we were like, no, this is a pressing need that we need to do. And so we came out, lost a lot of our connections within our denomination, and kind of torched our ability to work in a lot of the churches. But we had this vision. God put it on my heart for a while to start, like to plant a church. And I've been resisting that because it's a lot of work and it's scary and, and it's really hard work. And so I've been not wanting to do that, but it was the right time. Like in a pandemic where no one can go to a church anyway, it's the perfect time to start a church with no building and no money, because all you need is a few $100 to register for Zoom so you can do longer than 45-minute services, and you're golden. So that's what we did. And we've been advocating strongly. I'm big on the belief that if you have participated in systems and structures of oppression, that you need to, when you exit them, you need to work just as hard to participate in the dismantling of those systems. And it's not that I want to see the church dismantled. I want to see the church stop hurting people. And I think there's ample evidence scripturally that being homophobic and discriminating against people and not letting them be baptized or not letting them serve in the church, or even sometimes not letting them attend a church based on their sexuality is completely against the gospel and completely against what the Bible is saying and what the Bible is talking about. So we've just been working towards that. But like, I've known I was queer since I was 16. And I think my spouse even earlier than that. When we got together, we were upfront about it. But it worked. And we're like, at the time we weren't affirming, and we're like, well, this seems like a great option because we love each other. Our queerness complements each other. And we look straight on the outside. So, hey, let's do it. It's so funny though, because like a lot of people are like, on my TikTok or elsewhere, like, you're just trying to justify your own sinful lifestyle. I'm like, the sinful lifestyle of staying married to the mother of my children and partner of 14 years. Like, I'm like, how am I what part of my lifestyle would you prefer? I divorce my spouse, like, who is queer? Like, what do you want to have happen here? Like, I don't understand what part of my lifestyle you think, even under your narrow view. Like, and again, to reiterate, like, I don't think if people come out as gay and have to leave their spouse because their spouse, they're not compatible based on their sexual orientations, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think most people are in that situation because of the church in the first place. So the church has a lot to answer for a lot of the divorces happening, not the people. But I'm like, even according to these people's narrow, like, I'm not living in sin. I'm still married to my spouse. I'm still married to the mother of my children, right? Like, my kids, even though my spouse is gender fluid, they still call her mom. And it's just like the adults call them by their by their chosen name. So
it's so annoying. Annoying is not the right word. When you're told your whole life something is wrong and an abomination and disgusting, to deal with the residual phobias because of that. And I've been like deep diving into YouTube of like history, queer history, like even like allegories from TV shows, and just how much has been erased, or you only know it in code. Like old movies, like the address that was referenced really briefly was known in the gay community as a gay club. Like, really subtle stuff.
Yeah, like the term eligible bachelor in a lot of old movies was like code for, well, this person is gay. Like in older history books, if someone was clearly queer in history and had like lived with their partner, like older history books would be like, they lived with their best friend, like Susan, who they would occasionally share a bed with because they were such good friends. I'm like, come on, guys. Like, yeah, I recently rewatched The Matrix, which was like, when I was in high school, The Matrix was used as like the ultimate Christian allegory. They're like, Jesus is Morpheus and he's presenting you with the truth. You can take the red pill and like wake up to the reality of Jesus and the cross. You can take the blue pill and go back to your meaningless secular life and stuff like that. And I'm watching it now as someone who's been advocating for queer and trans rights for the last out loud and actively for the last year, and just been like, man, this is such an allegory for transgender. Like, it's not even subtle. Like, Agent Smith keeps dead naming Neo he's like, Mr. Anderson, and at the end of the movie he goes, my name is Neo, and then kicks his ass. I'm like, this is insane.
The people who created that,
yeah, they're transgender, yeah,
sisters now.
Yeah, they the Wachowski sisters. Yeah, which is amazing. There's a really great documentary too, by Laverne Cox. I'm trying to remember what, and it's called Disclosure. And they interviewed Lana Wachowski about her work.
I want to teach people compassion because I know it took me so long to learn it.
Right.
Like when my brother came out as trans, I was like, religion only ever made me, I haven't walked away from religion or God, but like in general, religion or the evangelicalism that I was raised in only ever pushed me to be a crappier person, like in a lot of ways. Like in the beginning I was accepting, and we were even kind of joking about it. Like at that point he was wearing a bikini and, just passing very easily as a very pretty girl. And, I remember us just joking about that. Like, yeah, you make a pretty good looking girl. But then I was a missionary at the time. I was traveling full time as an actor missionary. And I decided like, okay, I've got to knuckle down on my faith. I need to figure this out. And I like read the Bible way too quickly. When you read something to get answers, you can really just pull what you want to pull out of it.
Right.
And I just like knuckle down. I started a blog, and I was like about how Christians need to stand up for the truth, even when it's hard, even when it's unpopular. And I went the complete other way of just like, what's wrong is what's wrong, what's right is what's right. And
right.
I didn't like say that to his face or in messages. I might have said that I don't agree with your lifestyle thing, but I never like lectured. But I would like lecture other people, like other people that were trying to say boy pronouns. I'd be like, no, God's gonna get through to her, don't worry, God's got this. And
right.
I like, as time wore on, because this was over a span of like 7 years. As time wore on, I was like not going to use dead name, and I was not going to use female pronouns because I saw how hurtful that was.
Right.
But I wasn't going to say boy ones either because they didn't feel right.
Mm.
So I would just use very weird English and be like, what does you think?
Like I think I was there a while too. And like the interesting thing is, like, once I understood the science of gender, and like the science of sex and gender, I was like, oh, like this is very clearly the way people are created. And then like that was to me like very much, I was like, this is the way that we grandfather in, like from a philosophical perspective, homosexuality. Like, because if a person can be male presenting but have entirely female hormones and chromosomes, which is possible. Are they gay if they're straight, or straight if they're gay, right? Like like if they like women, like they're male presenting on the outside, but they like women, but they like their biology on the inside is entirely female. Are they gay or straight, right? So I was like that's sort of how we're gonna like grandfather in the homosexuality issue. But I mean, even the more I studied scripture, the more I realized that's not necessary, and we can just believe people are who they say they are, and we can just take people as God created them, meaning like how they identify. Like God created your brother exactly the way he needed to be created, right? Like it was just that's who God wanted him to be, and that's beautiful, and that's powerful. I do also, like, I know what you're saying, like I want to have compassion and be patient with people as they work through this. And if I see that they're working through it, I feel like I'm able to give them some space to do that, and be supportive, even if they're not there yet. At the same time, the suicide rate of LGBTQ youth who have come out of religious institutions is through the roof.
The feeling is so mutual. Like, you don't even understand how mutual that feeling is. We are mutually embarrassed by each other. Do better.
I am grateful for the people who gave me the time and space I needed to come around on the issue. And so I want to offer that to other people. At the same time, I think we're in a crisis. And so I'm like sort of walking that line of like, if like even if you don't agree with trans rights, you can still use someone's correct pronouns. Like, that's not going against your religion to do that. Like people who don't agree with gay marriage are still going to call a married gay couple like refer to them as that person's husband, right? Or that person's wife if they're lesbians, right? Acknowledging the institution that they are identifying with is not necessarily affirming it, right? Like, it's like you can like, so I think like, so not putting up with abusive behavior, or toxic behavior, or like harmful things like that. Like, my encouragement to churches who are not affirming, like who are not like 100% affirming of the entire LGBTQA plus spectrum, is be honest about it, because so many churches are like, we love everyone, we're a welcoming environment to everyone, and then gay people, trans people, queer people will start attending those churches and will want to get baptized, and oh no, we don't agree with your and your partner's lifestyle, we can't baptize you. It's like, well, I've invested a year now in this community thinking I was a part of this community, and now you're telling me I can't be a member of your church and I can't be baptized here, and you don't recognize the very real love I have for my partner, right? Like, so like, if churches are going to be not fully on board with affirming the entire spectrum, you need to be honest about it, so that you don't lure people into these toxic environments. And like, you're not doing anyone any favors. People are just going to be more disillusioned with the church if they go through that experience than they would have been if they hadn't. So,
yeah,
because a lot of times people expect the church and religious people to be bigoted and closed off, and it's then they buy into this narrative that, oh, this church isn't, and then they find out after so much emotional investment that, oh, they are after all. Okay, so yeah, so it's
in the beginning, I felt like I couldn't say male pronouns because that was letting God down in
right.
acknowledging that there would have been a mistake made in the
Right.
body that they were born into, that he was born into. And it's just a big purple elephant in the room when I'm in Utah. It's sad. It's hard to hear the girl pronouns.
Whenever I hear someone get dead named, especially by someone who's like, who claims to love them, I'm like, you don't know how damaging that is. Like you don't know how damaging that is to be dead named or dead pronoun like that. And like, the reality of it is, like, the more that we understand about the science is that God is just so much more creative than we've been giving him credit for, right?
Mhm.
Like I think of it like the color spectrum, and like when people are like, well, God created male and female. I'm like, yeah, he created red, yellow, and blue, but those three colors unlock the spectrum. And so male and female unlock the spectrum of gender and sexuality. And it's beautiful. And there's colors we can't even see, right? Like, there's like, we have certain color, we have a limited color spectrum range with our vision. And so there's gender and sexualities that we can't even see yet, because we just haven't encountered the means to perceive them, and God is just so much bigger and so much more loving and creative than we've been giving him credit for. So,
And that's something I really want to celebrate on this channel. I want to hear people's stories and because I believe that stories is what can change people's lives, what can change people's hearts. Like, it's not just if you've a person who's never met a trans person before.
Right.
That I had an interview with a trans woman just yesterday, and like to hear a bit of her story, to experience just 20, however long the video ends up being, 20-30 minutes of really getting to know her.
Right.
And seeing that she's a person. It's not just these creepy people twirling their mustaches looking for which children they can take to their lairs. Like,
I love that. The amount of queer people that there are, like, and not all of us are out. Not every trans person is out, right? Like a lot of trans people, there's a lot of women who have to live as men because it's not safe for them to be living their authentic selves, and vice versa. There's a lot of men who have to live as women because it's not safe for them to be their authentic selves. Like there's so much violence against trans people. And so like when people are like, oh, I've never met a trans person or I've never met a queer person, I'm like, you probably have. Like there's probably a few in your family. And the language that you use and the attitude and the things that you put out into the world are just showing them that you are not a safe person to come out to. I was having a conversation with somebody and he's like, the numbers of like queer and trans people are going up. I'm like, they're not going up. It's becoming safe to come out. Like it was illegal to be gay 60 years ago. So very few people were out of the closet because who wants to live that hard of a life, right? And like it was illegal to be trans. Like all these things.
It's like food allergies. Wow,
right.
so many more of these allergies now. No, there's not. There's just less people dying.
Right. Yeah. We've gotten better at keeping people alive. Or like with autism, like I'm an autistic person and people are like, oh, there's so much, like everyone's autistic now. I'm like, no, it's a spectrum disorder and we understand the spectrum better. And we understand like not every autistic person is going to be nonverbal with physical disabilities, right? Like there's more, there's people, there's just people. And we've always been this diverse and there's always been queer people. There's always been autistic people. There's always been people with food allergies. It's not more. We are just evolving into a more compassionate society. So we don't bring peanut butter to school because we don't want to kill our neighbor's kid anymore. And we have more like accommodations for people with disabilities because like their value isn't in what they can produce for society. Their value is in their personhood, right? When people start complaining about like how PC we are, I'm like, we're a more compassionate people. Like that's a good thing. Like you want a better future for your kids. Isn't that the whole goal? Like we want to leave the world a more compassionate, loving place for our children. And
like we were taught to judge a work by its fruit.
Right.
And the fruit of being anti-LGBTQ and conversion therapy for being gay or trans, all of these things has led to nothing but death.
Yeah, 100%. Well, and that's the thing. Like, I'm like, if Jesus is the Prince of Peace and conversion therapy, like, and homosexuality is wrong, conversion therapy work, like you'd think you would have countless testimonies of people who are more at peace with themselves after going through conversion therapy. Instead, you have countless deaths and people who have lifelong trauma and people who are like going to be having to see a counselor for the rest of their lives because of the damage done through these institutions. And I'm like, so like, yeah, you'll know them by their fruit. Like and then on the flip side, the people who have come to terms with their sexuality and their faith are some of the most peaceful people I know. Like these two things don't negate each other. I can be a queer person and a Christ follower at the same time, and they have immense peace about that. And the people who, the allies who come around and are affirming of homosexuality in the church, like they are more at peace. Like it's the people who are outraged at the idea of the LGBTQ community existing in religious spaces that are the people without the peace. And I'm like, well, who has Jesus then? I'm like, if Jesus is the Prince of Peace, and you will know Christ's disciples by their fruit, then like the fruit of being a disciple of Christ is life. The fruit of being a disciple of Christ is peace. And who are the people in the world right now who are at peace, and who are the people who are constantly in turmoil, right? Like,
if Jesus say love everyone, how me feel like I in an exclusive club? If God non-binary, how me justify reinforcing harmful stereotypical gender norms? If hell no exist, what keep me from killing people? If science true, how me trust bigoted pastor with incomplete degree from unaccredited denominational college?
I just want to find my people out there that are like that are sad about what they've been raised with, that want to be an ally but feel like they're betraying God or truth by being it, that want to unlearn horrible mindsets of disgust and disdain for things that are different. And I want to be I want my channel and my person as a whole to be like you are loved, you are welcomed, you are accepted. That's the kind of community I want to build. And so it's scary.
And I think that's really important, especially like because you were saying like you wanted to be an ally for so long, but you felt like you were like I feel like you have some regret about not doing it sooner, and I have the same regrets about not doing it sooner. But it's the fact that you're out here now and you're building this channel and you're talking to people and having these important conversations and like giving people a platform to be able to spread that message of love and inclusivity. I think that's like exactly the work that like I don't think you should have any shame about not coming out sooner as an ally, because you're doing this work, right? Like there's so many reasons why we don't act sooner, and we can beat ourselves up about them, or we can, to quote Frozen, do the next right thing, right? Like,
oh, that song. Thank you so much for that encouragement and for taking the time. It's my pleasure. It's really encouraging, and it's such a blessing. And I'm really thankful for your online church too.
Thank you. Thanks you for popping in.
Yeah,
thanks for popping in the last few weeks.
Yeah, and I can include a link to your channel, to your homepage, whatever, for other
Sure,
people.
Yeah. Yeah, right now on TikTok I'm CFC_Jeff. And then on Instagram we're Chosen Family Church, Twitter Chosen Family Chew. And if you want to attend an online totally LGBTQ2PIA plus affirming church, head to chosenfamilychurch.com and hit the Zoom link. Join a Zoom service.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And
thank you so much for having me.
Is I give hugs.
Love it.
We need hugs. We miss the hugs. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.